The house feels like a tomb. Every sound is amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old wooden floor beneath my feet, the soft rustle of wind outside. I sit in the living room, staring at the mess I didn't bother to clean up. The shattered picture frame on the floor, the chair I kicked out of frustration, and the empty glass on the coffee table that I don't remember setting down. Sloane's perfume still lingers in the air, faint but unmistakable, a reminder of how quickly she packed her things and left. She's gone, and this time, I don't know if she's coming back. I replay the fight in my head, over and over, as if I can rewind to the moment I lost control and rewrite the ending. It started like so many of our arguments, something small, stupid even. She forgot to sign our daughter up for a charity gift drive at school. It wasn't about the missed deadline, it was about what it represented. How do you forget something like that? I had snapped, pacing the kitchen like a lunatic. You can't even handle the simplest things. Her face tightened the way it always does when she feels cornered. I'm doing my best, Sam. I've got a lot on my plate, in case you hadn't noticed. Her voice had been sharp, defensive, throwing the blame back at me like it was a game we both knew too well. And maybe it was. I kept pushing, kept digging, until I said the words I wish I could take back. Maybe you should just leave if you can't take this seriously. I didn't mean it. God, I didn't mean it. But she didn't hesitate. She packed her things, grabbed the kids, and left for her Aunt Marjorie's house. I sat there, too proud to stop her, too angry to admit I'd gone too far. The sight of her standing at the door with a suitcase in one hand and our daughter's small hand in the other, it's burned into my memory. Our son followed behind them, looking back at me like he was waiting for me to say something, to stop them. But I didn't. Now, I'm sitting here alone in the wreckage of my own stubbornness. I glance at the photo on the mantel, a family beach trip from years ago. The kids were little then, their faces lit up with those big, toothy smiles kids have when they're too young to know the weight of the world. And Sloane. God, she was beautiful that day. Laughing, her hair blowing in the breeze, her arm draped around me like we were a team. What happened to us? I pick up my phone, my thumb hovering over her name in my contacts. I could call her, text her, tell her I'm sorry. But I don't. Instead, I scroll through social media, distracting myself with the meaningless noise of other people's lives. That's when I see it. It's a photo of Marjorie's house, all decked out in Christmas lights. One of our mutual friends had posted it, tagging her in the comments. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except for the mention of Trevor. Trevor. I remember him well enough. Marjorie's longtime friend. He was charming in a way that always felt a little too smooth, a little too practiced. The kind of guy who laughs too loud at his own jokes and finds ways to be the center of attention without ever seeming to try. And now he's spending time at Marjorie's house. The house where Sloane and my kids are staying. I tell myself it's nothing. Trevor is just helping out around the house. He's harmless. But the idea of him being there, around Sloane, gnaws at me. I close the app and toss my phone onto the couch. My mind won't stop racing. What if there's more to it? What if she's leaning on him the way she used to lean on me? For 10 years, I thought we could survive anything. Every fight, every disappointment, every bad habit. I believed we'd always find our way back to each other. But now I'm not so sure. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind betrayed me with images I didn't want to see. Sloane laughing at something Trevor said, the way her hand might brush his arm, the way his gaze might linger just a little too long. I hate myself for thinking it, but the thought burrows deeper, taking root where it doesn't belong. By morning, I feel like a man who's lived 100 years in a single night. The house is too quiet, every creak and groan of the floorboards reminding me that it's empty. I make myself coffee, but the smell only reminds me of her. Sloane used to tease me for being so particular about my brew, always rolling her eyes when I'd explain the exact ratio of beans to water. She'd always drink it anyway. Now, there's no one here to tease me. No one to fight with. Just the hollow sound of my own thoughts. I go through the motions of my day, pretending I have some kind of routine to stick to. The housework, the bills, checking emails for work, it all feels meaningless without the chaos of my family around me. I glance at the calendar on the fridge. Christmas is only a week away. The thought makes me wince. Christmas was always Sloane's favorite time of year. She'd go all out, decorating the house, baking cookies with the kids, making us all wear those ridiculous matching pajamas for photos. I hated it, but I played along because it made her happy. This year, though, there's no tree in the corner, no string of lights tangled on the dining room table waiting to be hung. Just me, sitting here like a ghost of my former self. By midday, I can't stand the silence anymore. I grab my keys and decide to head out for a drive. I don't have a destination in mind, but I need to get out of this house before it swallows me whole. I end up at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place we used to go to when we were dating. I order a coffee and sit by the window, staring out at the snowfall. The warmth of the cup in my hands does little to thaw the cold knot in my chest. As I sit there, my phone buzzes on the table. It's a text from my daughter. "Hi, Dad. Just wanted to let you know we're okay." I stare at the message for a long moment before typing a response. "I'm glad to hear that. I miss you and your brother. How's your mom?" The dots appear, then disappear. I imagine her hesitating, trying to decide how much to say. Finally, her reply comes through. "She's fine. Trevor's here a lot. He's funny." Mom laughs at his jokes. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Trevor. Again. My grip tightens around the phone. Does he stay late? I regret the question as soon as I send it. I shouldn't drag Emma into this, but I can't help myself. The dots appear again, and this time, the reply is slower. "Sometimes. But Aunt Marjorie is always around too." "Don't worry, Dad. Don't worry." How the hell am I supposed to do that? I don't respond. I finish my coffee and leave the cafe, my thoughts darker than when I arrived. The drive home feels like a blur, the streets blending together as I turn the situation over in my head. When I get back to the house, I sit in the driveway for a long time. The house looms in front of me, cold and uninviting. I think about calling her, demanding to know what the hell is going on, but I know it would only lead to another fight. And what would I even say? Instead, I head inside and sit on the couch, staring at my phone. I scroll through old photos of us. Vacations, birthdays, moments I thought were perfect at the time but now feel tainted by everything that's happened. Then, without thinking, I pull up her number and call. It rings twice before she picks up. "Sam." Her voice is soft, tentative, like she doesn't know what to expect. "Hey," I say, my voice catching in my throat. I wanted to see how you're doing." There's a long pause on the other end. When she finally speaks, her tone is guarded. "We're fine. The kids are fine. I miss them," I say, and it's the truth. "I miss all of you." She doesn't respond right away. I can hear the faint sound of a TV in the background, the muffled laughter of our son. "Sam," she says finally, her voice tired. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to come home," I blurt out before I can stop myself. The words hang there, heavy and vulnerable. She sighs, and it feels like the air is being sucked out of the room. I don't know if that's a good idea. Not yet. Not yet. The words cut deeper than I expected, and I grip the phone tighter. Is it because of Trevor? The silence on the other end is deafening. "Sloane," I press, my voice low and tense. "Is it him?" "Don't do this," she says quietly, almost pleading. "Don't make this harder than it already is." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and unnatural. "I think it's already hard enough, don't you?" She doesn't answer, and I know I've pushed too far. The line goes dead a moment later, leaving me alone with nothing but my thoughts and the deafening silence of the house. The silence after she hung up was deafening, but the anger in my chest burned loud and hot. My phone was still in my hand, and for a moment, I stared at it like I expected her to call back. Of course, she didn't. I wanted to believe she was avoiding me because of the fight, because she was hurt, because we both needed time to cool off. But I couldn't shake the way she hesitated when I mentioned Trevor. That pause was like a knife twisting in my gut. By the next day, my thoughts were a storm I couldn't control. I needed answers. I needed to know if the nagging suspicions in my head were just my own insecurities or if they were something more. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to Marjorie's house unannounced. The snow had started falling again, and the roads were slick, but I didn't care. I was running on adrenaline, on the kind of irrational drive that takes over when your mind convinces you the truth is just within reach. Marjorie's place came into view as I rounded the corner. Her house was lit up with Christmas decorations, glowing warmly against the cold, dark night. I pulled up across the street and turned off the engine, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the house. Through the large bay window, I could see the living room clearly. Marjorie was sitting on the couch, laughing at something, while Sloane stood nearby, holding a mug of what I assumed was tea. She looked tired, her shoulders slightly hunched, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. And then I saw him. Trevor was standing close to her. Too close. He was holding a small box, unwrapping it with exaggerated flair while the room watched. Sloane laughed at whatever he said, her head tilting back just slightly, the way she used to when I'd tell a joke that actually landed. I sat there, frozen, watching as Trevor handed her the unwrapped box. She opened it, pulling out a small ornament, a simple silver star. She smiled and said something I couldn't hear, and Trevor reached out, gently brushing his fingers against hers as she handed the ornament back to him. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My heart was pounding in my chest, a mix of rage and humiliation coursing through me. What the hell was he doing here? Why was he giving her gifts? Why was she letting him? I thought about storming in, demanding answers right there in front of everyone. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the kids. I hadn't seen them yet, but I knew they were there somewhere in the house. I couldn't make a scene, not with them watching. So I sat there, watching like a damn fool, until Trevor finally left. He walked out the front door, the silver star ornament in his hand, and headed toward his car parked in the driveway. As he passed under the porch light, I got a good look at his face. Smug. Smiling. Like he didn't have a care in the world. I waited until he was gone, until the taillights of his car disappeared down the street, before I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed Sloane's number. She picked up on the third ring. Sam. I'm outside, I said, my voice sharp and cold. Come out here. Now. There was a pause. You're what? Why are you? Outside, I interrupted, cutting her off. I need to talk to you. Alone. Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, she sighed. Give me a minute. I watched as she came to the front door, pulling her coat tightly around herself against the cold. She stepped outside, her breath visible in the frigid air, and walked toward the car. When she opened the passenger door and got in, the scent of her perfume hit me like a memory I didn't want to relive. She closed the door and looked at me, her expression guarded. What are you doing here, Sam? She asked, her voice low. I could ask you the same thing, I shot back. But I already know the answer. You're staying here, playing house with Trevor. Her face hardened immediately. Trevor's just a friend, she said, her tone clipped. You're being ridiculous. Am I? I demanded. I saw him. I saw the way he looks at you. I saw the way you let him look at you. She shook her head, laughing bitterly. You're unbelievable. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to leave our home, to bring the kids into this mess? I came here because I needed space, Sam. Because I needed time to think. And what exactly were you thinking when you let him get close to you? I snapped. Her eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there, too. Guilt. It was subtle, but I saw it. She looked away, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Trevor's been helping," she said quietly. "He's been kind, that's all." "Kind," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call it?" She looked at me then, her expression softening. "Nothing's happened, Sam. I swear." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But the image of Trevor's hand brushing hers was burned into my mind. "Sloane," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and pain. "If you're lying to me, tell me now. Don't make me find out some other way." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her silence was louder than any confession could have been. And in that moment I knew. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, like a storm waiting to break. Sloane sat there in the passenger seat, her face pale against the glow of the dashboard lights. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. That hesitation, it told me everything I needed to know. "Say it," I demanded, my voice low and cold. "Just tell me the truth, Sloane." Her eyes dropped to her lap, her hands twisting the hem of her coat. "Sam, it's not what you think. Not what I think." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "I think you've been spending your time with Trevor, letting him step into my place. I think you've been telling him things you should have been telling me. And I think he's made his move, and you let him." Her head snapped up at that, and for a moment I thought she might deny it outright. But the look on her face wasn't one of anger or outrage. It was guilt. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Those words hit me like a hammer to the chest. My breath caught, and for a moment I couldn't speak. "So it did happen," I said finally, my voice trembling with rage. "You let it happen." Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away sharply. "Sam, listen to me," she pleaded. "It wasn't planned. I was feeling vulnerable, and Trevor was. He was there. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "A mistake," I repeated, the word burning on my tongue. "Is that what you call it? A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday or burning dinner. What you did," my voice cracked, and I had to pause, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You broke us, Sloane. You broke everything." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know I did. And I hate myself for it. It was one night, Sam. Just one night. It didn't mean anything." "One night," I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You think that makes it better? You think it hurts less because it was just one night?" She didn't respond, just sat there crying quietly, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to yell, to scream, to smash something just to release the pressure building inside me. But all I could do was grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. "Why him? Why anyone? Was I not enough?" Her head shot up, and she shook her head violently. "No, Sam. It wasn't about you. It wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because I was falling apart, and I didn't know how to tell you. Every fight, every argument, it felt like we were pushing each other further and further away. And Trevor, he was just there at the wrong time." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and empty. "Convenient for him, wasn't it?" "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. If I could take it back, I would. You have to believe me." "I don't know what I believe anymore," I said, my voice flat. The weight of her betrayal was suffocating, pressing down on my chest until I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to get out of the car, to get away from her, but I couldn't move. My mind was racing, cycling through every moment of our marriage, searching for the cracks I hadn't seen before. "Does he know?" I asked suddenly. She blinked, confused. "What?" "Trevor," I said, my voice sharp. "Does he know that it's over? That you're done with whatever this was?" "Yes," she said quickly, nodding. "I told him it was a mistake." I haven't seen him alone since. I swear, Sam. It's over. It meant nothing. Nothing, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. It meant nothing, but it's still enough to destroy everything we built. Sam, please, she said, her voice breaking again. Please don't let this be the end of us. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what to do. I turned to look at her then, really look at her. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. She looked desperate, broken in a way I hadn't seen before. I don't know if this can be fixed, I said, my voice hollow. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Her breath hitched, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I turned my gaze back to the windshield, staring out at the falling snow. The silence in the car was deafening, but my mind was anything but quiet. The woman I had loved for 20 years had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. And now, she was sitting beside me, begging for a chance to make things right. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to try to rebuild what we had for the sake of our family. But another part of me, the part that felt like a knife was lodged in my chest, wanted to walk away and never look back. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely audible. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with hope. I'll give you all the time you need, she said quickly. Anything you need, Sam. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Without another word, I started the car and drove away, leaving her standing there in the snow as I disappeared into the night. I didn't go home right away. Driving aimlessly through the snow-covered streets felt safer than being trapped in the house with my thoughts. The weight of her confession was unbearable, and I didn't trust myself to sit in silence without breaking something. The image of Sloane and Trevor together played on a loop in my mind. Her words, "It was one night." It meant nothing, kept ringing in my ears, but they didn't bring any comfort. If it meant nothing, why did it feel like everything? Eventually, I ended up at a nearby park, the kind of place where families came to sled and build snowmen during the holidays. Tonight, though, it was deserted. I parked the car and sat there, staring out at the empty swings swaying gently in the wind. I thought about the first time I brought Sloane here. It was years ago, before the kids, before the fights. We'd stayed late after a picnic, watching the stars while she leaned against my shoulder. She'd laughed as I tried, and failed, to push her on the swing without her falling off. We were so different back then. We loved each other with an intensity that felt unbreakable. But somewhere along the way, we'd lost that version of ourselves. I wasn't blind to my own faults. I'd been controlling, critical, always expecting more from her even when she was already stretched too thin. I'd pushed her away, and Trevor had been there to catch her when she fell. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't forgive what she'd done. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I don't know how long I sat there in the cold before my phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated before pulling it out, half expecting another text from Sloane. But it wasn't her. It was Emma, my daughter. "Are you okay, Dad?" Mom came back in crying. I stared at the screen, my heart twisting. She shouldn't have to deal with this, not at her age. None of this was her fault, and yet she was caught in the middle of it. "I'm fine. I'll check in tomorrow. Get some sleep, sweetheart." I put the phone away, my chest tightening with guilt. No matter how much I hated Sloane for what she'd done, I couldn't let my anger destroy my kids' sense of stability. If I let this spiral any further, I'd risk losing them too. When I finally made it home, the house felt colder than ever. I went straight to the kitchen, poured a drink, and sat at the table in silence. The glass felt heavy in my hand, and I stared at the amber liquid, hoping it would drown out the ache in my chest. But nothing worked. Not the drink. Not the silence. Not even the endless pacing around the empty house. By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. Later that day, I called her. When she answered, her voice was soft, cautious. "Sam, we need to talk," I said. She hesitated. Okay. When? Today, I replied. I'll come to Marjorie's. There was another pause before she finally said, All right. When I arrived, the sight of her waiting on the porch nearly stopped me in my tracks. She looked worn down, smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had hollowed her out. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She led me inside to the living room, where Marjorie sat with the kids. Sloane gestured for me to follow her into the kitchen, where we could talk in private. I stood there, my arms crossed, leaning against the counter as she fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. I don't want this to get any messier than it already is, I said, cutting straight to the point. If we're going to try to fix this, for the kids, we need to set some ground rules. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with surprise. You mean, you're willing to try? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm not going to make a decision until I see if you're actually serious about fixing this. If you're not, tell me now, and we'll stop wasting each other's time. I am serious, she said quickly, her voice trembling. Sam, I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I nodded slowly. Then the first thing you're going to do is cut Trevor out of your life. Completely. No excuses, no exceptions. If he so much as sends you a text, I want to know about it. She flinched at the name, but she nodded. He's already out of my life. I told him we couldn't talk anymore. He won't come near me, I promise. Good, I said. Because if I find out you're lying, Sloane, that's it. I'm done. Do you understand? Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded again. I understand. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Finally, I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. We'll try, I said, my voice low. But it's going to take time. And you're going to have to show me that I can trust you again. Words aren't enough, Sloane. I will, she said quickly. I'll prove it to you every day. I swear. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there as I made my way back to the kids. I wasn't sure if I believed her. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. But for the sake of our family, I was willing to try. The days following my conversation with Sloane felt like treading water in the middle of a storm. I'd agreed to try, to see if there was anything left to salvage, but the anger and betrayal still clung to me like a second skin. Every time I looked at her, I saw Trevor. Every time she spoke, I questioned whether her words were real or just another lie. We decided to take things slowly. She'd stay at Marjorie's for the time being while we sorted out our next steps. The arrangement gave me space to breathe, but it also meant I spent most nights alone, pacing the empty house, caught between wanting to forgive her and wanting to walk away for good. A week later, we had our first counseling session. I was skeptical walking in, my arms crossed as I sat on the stiff leather couch. Sloane sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. The therapist, a calm woman with kind eyes, started by asking us to share why we were there. Sloane spoke first, her voice soft and hesitant. I'm here because I made a terrible mistake, and I want to fix what I broke. I want to earn back Sam's trust and rebuild our family. I listened, my jaw tightening with every word. It wasn't that I didn't believe her remorse. It was that her actions had made it impossible to trust her, no matter how sincere she sounded. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I'm here because she cheated on me, I said bluntly. Because I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at her the same way again. The therapist nodded, her expression neutral. That's a valid feeling, Sam. Betrayal has a way of changing how we see the people we love. But you're here, which means part of you wants to try. Can you tell me why? I hesitated. The good ones, the bad ones, the moments that made me believe we could weather anything. Finally, I said, because I don't want to make a decision I'll regret. And because of the kids. They deserve a chance at having their family back. The session was raw, painful. We talked about the cracks in our marriage, the fights that built walls between us, and the choices that led us to this point. Sloane admitted how lonely she'd felt, how she'd stopped trying to reach out because she was afraid I wouldn't care. I admitted that my controlling tendencies had made her feel like she was never good enough. The therapist guided us through it all, helping us unravel years of resentment and miscommunication. But even as I spoke, a part of me wondered if it was too late. Later that night, back at the house, I sat alone in the darkened living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The Christmas tree still wasn't up, and the house felt as cold and empty as ever. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Sloane. "Thank you for coming to therapy today. I know it wasn't easy, but it means a lot to me." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. I could feel her desperation in those words, her need for reassurance. But I wasn't ready to give her that. Not yet. Instead, I typed out a simple response. "We'll see how it goes." The days turned into weeks. We continued therapy, each session peeling back another layer of the mess we'd created. Sloane threw herself into proving her commitment. She cut all ties with Trevor, blocking his number and deleting him from her social media accounts. She offered to share her phone with me, her emails, even her location. I didn't ask for any of that, but she gave it anyway. It was like she was trying to build a wall of transparency between us, one brick at a time. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. Every time she left Marjorie's house, I wondered where she was going. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt a pang of suspicion. I hated that part of myself, but I couldn't help it. One evening, I decided to visit Marjorie's house again. This time, it wasn't to confront Sloane but to see my kids. I hadn't spent much time with them since the separation, and I missed them more than I cared to admit. When I arrived, Emma and Liam were thrilled to see me. We spent hours playing board games in the living room, their laughter filling the house in a way that made my chest ache. Sloane stayed in the background, giving us space but occasionally watching us from the doorway. At one point, I caught her eye. She smiled softly, her expression a mix of hope and sadness. For the first time in weeks, I didn't look away. That night, as I tucked Liam into bed, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Are you and Mom going to get back together?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I sat down on the edge of his bed, ruffling his hair. "I don't know, buddy," I said honestly. "We're trying to figure things out." He nodded, his little face serious. "I hope you do. I miss us all being together." His words stayed with me long after I left the house. As I drove home, I thought about the look on his face, the way Emma had hugged me so tightly when I walked through the door. The kids didn't deserve this. Whatever happened between me and Sloane, they deserved stability, love, and the chance to feel like a family again. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table and made a decision. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice tentative. "Sam, we need to keep trying," I said. "Not just for the kids, for us. But you need to understand that this is going to take time. You can't rush me into forgiving you." "I understand," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I'll wait as long as it takes. I just want us to have a chance." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the decision settling over me. "Then we keep going," I said. "One day at a time." Agreeing to try was one thing. Living through the slow, grueling process of rebuilding our marriage was something else entirely. The first few weeks felt like navigating a minefield. Every conversation was fraught with tension, every silence filled with things we weren't ready to say. Sloane was cautious around me, like she was afraid of setting me off. I could see the guilt in her every movement, the way she avoided meeting my eyes for too long, the way she hesitated before speaking. And yet, she never stopped trying. She started texting me daily, small updates about her day, kind words, even apologies when she didn't need to offer them. She kept attending therapy with me, even when the sessions were painful and raw. But no matter how much effort she put in, my mind kept drifting back to Trevor. One night, during one of our therapy sessions, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Have you seen him?" I asked, cutting through whatever polite discussion we'd been having about communication. Sloane looked startled. "What?" "Trevor," I said, my voice sharp. "Since you told him it was over, have you seen him?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I haven't. I told you, I cut him out completely." "Completely?" I pressed, leaning forward. "No texts, no calls, nothing?" "Nothing," she said firmly. The therapist, sensing the tension, stepped in. "Sam, it's understandable that you're still feeling mistrustful, but we have to focus on what's happening now, not just what happened in the past." I turned to her, my jaw tight. How am I supposed to focus on now when I can't stop thinking about what she did? How am I supposed to trust her when the only proof I have is her word? "I don't know how to convince you," Sloane said softly, her voice breaking. "But I'll keep trying, Sam. I'll keep trying until you believe me again." Her words lingered in my mind long after the session ended. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt was always there, gnawing at me. A few days later, I got the answer I didn't want, but needed. It happened on a Friday evening. I was working late, trying to distract myself with paperwork, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of our mutual friends, Mark. "Hey, man. I don't know if you want to hear this, but I just saw Trevor at the coffee shop. He mentioned Sloane. Said he's been thinking about her a lot." I stared at the message, my stomach churning. My first instinct was to brush it off, to tell myself that Mark was just stirring the pot. But the seed of suspicion had already been planted. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and called Trevor. The line rang twice before he picked up. "Hello. It's Sam," I said, my voice icy. There was a pause on the other end. "Sam. Wow. Didn't expect to hear from you." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "Are you still in contact with Sloane?" He hesitated, and I could hear the smirk in his voice when he finally answered. "Look, man, I don't want to get in the middle of this." "You're already in the middle of it," I said, my voice rising. "Tell me the truth, Trevor." He sighed. "She told me we couldn't talk anymore. I'm respecting that. But if you think she doesn't still care..." I didn't let him finish. "You're a liar and a coward," I growled. "Stay the hell away from my family." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with rage. That night, I confronted Sloane. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, going over some papers for work. She looked up when she saw me, her expression wary. "Sam." I dropped my phone on the table, the screen still displaying Mark's message. "Care to explain this?" Her brow furrowed as she read the text. "What is this?" "Mark said Trevor was talking about you," I said, my voice cold. "Said he's been thinking about you. So either he's lying, or you are." "I'm not lying," she said quickly, her eyes wide. "I haven't spoken to him. I told him it was over. I swear to you, Sam." "Then why is he still talking about you?" I demanded. "Why does he think he still has a chance?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know. I can't control what he says or thinks. All I can do is control my actions, and I've done everything you asked." I paced the room, my mind racing. I wanted to believe her, but Trevor's voice was still ringing in my ears. Finally, I stopped and looked at her. "If you're telling the truth, you need to prove it. No more excuses, no more hesitation. I need to know you're done with him, completely." "I am," she said firmly, standing up and meeting my gaze. "I've been done with him since the moment I realized how much I'd hurt you. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you, Sam. Whatever it takes." I stared at her, searching for any sign of deceit. But all I saw was sincerity and desperation. "Then we keep going," I said finally. "But this is your last chance, Sloane. If I catch you in another lie, we're done. For good." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I won't let you down again. As I walked out of the kitchen, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd made the right choice. I was giving her one last chance to prove herself, but the scars of her betrayal were still raw. Only time would tell if I'd regret it. Giving Sloane one last chance was a gamble, and every day that followed felt like a test, for both of us. I scrutinized everything she did, looking for cracks in her promises, for signs that she wasn't as committed as she claimed. But if she was hiding anything, she was damn good at it. Sloane went out of her way to rebuild what she'd broken. She showed up to every therapy session, even the ones where I barely spoke to her. She answered every question I asked, no matter how pointed or painful. She cut Trevor out of her life completely and gave me access to anything I wanted. Her phone, her emails, even her location. But none of it erased what had happened. Late at night, when the house was silent, I'd lie awake in bed and wonder if I was making a mistake. I replayed every argument, every harsh word we'd exchanged over the years, trying to figure out how we'd gotten here. Was this all my fault? Was I too demanding, too controlling? Or had Sloane just been looking for an excuse to walk away? It didn't help that Christmas was approaching, and with it, the memories of what our family used to be. The holidays had always been Sloane's favorite time of year, and she'd turned them into a big production. Decorations everywhere, endless baking, carols playing in the background. This year, the house felt cold and empty, the absence of her cheer weighing heavily on me. A week before Christmas, Sloane asked if she could come over to help decorate. "It's for the kids," she said when she called. "They've been asking about the tree." I thought we could do it together. I wanted to say no, but I couldn't bring myself to disappoint Emma and Liam. "Fine," I said, my voice clipped. "But this doesn't mean anything. Don't think this fixes us." "I understand," she said quietly. When she arrived that evening with the kids in tow, the tension in the air was palpable. She smiled hesitantly as she stepped inside, carrying a box of ornaments. I brought some of the decorations from Marjorie's. The kids wanted their favorites. Emma and Liam, oblivious to the strain between us, threw themselves into decorating with enthusiasm. They bickered over where to put the ornaments, laughing as they tried to untangle the lights. For the first time in weeks, the house felt alive again. Sloane stayed on the edges, helping the kids but keeping her distance from me. I watched her from across the room, studying her every move. She seemed different, quieter, more reserved. The fiery defiance that used to define her had been replaced by something softer, more subdued. When the tree was finished, Emma insisted on taking a family picture. I hesitated, but the look on her face was enough to convince me. We stood awkwardly in front of the tree, Sloane beside me, the kids squished between us. As the camera clicked, I realized how strange it felt to be this close to her again. The scent of her perfume, the warmth of her presence, it all brought back memories I wasn't ready to confront. After the kids went to bed, Sloane stayed behind to clean up. I stood in the doorway, watching as she carefully wrapped the empty ornament boxes and stacked them neatly. "You don't have to do that," I said finally. She looked up, startled. "It's okay. I don't mind." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of everything unsaid hung between us like a wall we didn't know how to climb. Finally, she broke the silence. "Sam, I know it's going to take time. I know I can't undo what I did. But I want you to know that I'm not giving up on us. No matter how long it takes, I'll keep trying." Her words should have reassured me, but they didn't. All I felt was exhaustion. "I don't know if trying is enough," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. But I'm not giving up. Even if it takes years, I'll keep proving to you that I'm worth it." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and headed upstairs, leaving her alone in the glow of the Christmas lights. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to shift. It wasn't a dramatic change, just small moments that felt different. Sloane kept showing up, not just for me but for the kids. She was more patient with them, more attentive. She even started baking again, sending over plates of cookies and homemade pies, like she was trying to recapture the warmth of the holidays we used to share. I could feel myself softening, though I tried to fight it. On Christmas morning, we gathered at the house to open presents. The kids tore through the wrapping paper with gleeful abandon, their laughter filling the room. Sloane sat beside me on the couch, her presence no longer feeling like an intrusion. As the day went on, I found myself watching her more closely. The way she smiled at the kids, the way she laughed at their silly jokes. It reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. That night, after the kids went to bed, she turned to me as she was putting on her coat. "Thank you," she said softly, "for letting me be here today." I hesitated before answering. "It's for the kids," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. The new year came quietly, without fanfare. By then, the house felt less like a shell and more like home again. Sloane and the kids visited more often, and the awkward silences between us were gradually replaced by conversations that felt, if not normal, at least less strained. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not fully. The wound she'd left was still raw, and some nights, the memories of her betrayal hit me like a punch to the chest. But there were other nights when she stayed late after the kids had gone to bed, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, when I caught glimpses of what we used to have. It was those moments that gave me hope, even if I wasn't ready to admit it. One night, a few weeks into January, Sloane came over to drop off some paperwork for the kids. She lingered at the door, hesitating like she wasn't sure if she should stay. "You want to come in?" I asked, surprising even myself. She nodded, stepping inside. We sat in the living room, the fireplace crackling softly in the background. She looked nervous, twisting her hands in her lap. "Sam," she started, her voice trembling. "I know I've said this before, but I need you to hear me. I'm so sorry for what I did. For all of it. For hurting you, for betraying everything we built. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know how much I regret it." I didn't say anything at first, just watched her as she spoke. Her words felt different this time, not rehearsed, not desperate. Just honest. "I've been trying to figure out how to make things right," she continued. "But the truth is, I can't. I can only do better from here. And I know I have to prove that to you. Not just once, but every single day. For as long as it takes." Her voice broke, and she wiped at her eyes, but she didn't stop. "You and the kids are my world, Sam. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. For the first time, I let them settle without immediately questioning them. "I've been thinking about us," I said finally. My voice was steady, but my chest felt tight. "About what we had and what we lost. And the truth is, I'm still angry. I don't know if I'll ever stop being angry. But I also know that what we had was worth fighting for." Her eyes widened, hope flickering across her face. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were," I continued. "But maybe we don't have to. Maybe we can start over. Build something new." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded. "I want that more than anything," she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the woman I fell in love with. Not the woman who had betrayed me, but the woman who had shared 2 decades of my life. The woman who had fought with me, laughed with me, raised a family with me. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to take the first step. In the weeks that followed, things began to change. Slowly, tentatively, we started spending more time together. She moved back into the house, not as my wife, but as a partner who was willing to rebuild everything she'd broken. There were still bad days, days when the past felt too heavy to ignore. But there were also good days, days when we laughed, when the kids smiled, when the house felt warm again. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." I didn't respond right away, just stared out at the horizon. "Finally," I said, "it's not about giving you a second chance. It's about giving us a second chance. And I hope you don't waste it. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I won't. Months later, as spring arrived and the world outside began to thaw, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The scars of her betrayal would always be there, but they no longer defined us. Our marriage wasn't perfect. It never had been. But for the first time in years, it felt like we were fighting for the same thing, for each other. Looking back, I knew I'd made the right choice. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. And as I sat in the quiet of our home, listening to the laughter of our kids in the background, I realized that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. Sloane had broken something in me that might never fully heal, but she had also shown me that love isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard. In the end, I didn't forgive her because she deserved it. I forgave her because I deserved it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.